You are 74 years old, and you are sitting on a plastic bench outside a gas station in a town you don't recognize, watching the taillights of your son's car shrink into the distance until they disappear completely. Your hands are folded in your lap. Your suitcase, the same brown leather one you packed for your honeymoon 51 years ago, sits beside your feet. The wind picks up, and you pull your cardigan tighter around your shoulders, and you wait. You keep waiting because some small, stubborn part of you still believes he's circling back, that this is a mistake, that any minute now, his car will pull back into the lot, and he'll say, "Mom, I'm so sorry, I got confused. Come on, let's go." If you've ever waited for someone who wasn't coming back, a parent, a partner, a memory of who your child used to be, you already know how this story is going to open one more wound before it heals. Stay with me until the end, because what happens to you today is going to change everything. And if stories like this move you, hit subscribe now, because there's a lot more waiting to be told, and you don't want to miss where this one goes. 3 hours ago, you were in your own kitchen, wiping down the counter you'd wiped down every morning for 40 years. The counter where your husband, Wendell, used to sit with his coffee and read the paper before the world got too loud and too fast for men like him. The kitchen still smells faintly of the cinnamon you baked into last Sunday's bread, and the yellow curtains, the ones Wendell always teased you for loving too much, still catch the morning light exactly the way they did the day you first hung them, back when Palmer was still small enough to sit on the counter and steal batter from the mixing bowl with his fingers. Wendell has been gone 6 years now. Since then, the house has been quiet in a way that used to frighten you, and then slowly became a kind of peace. You grew your tomatoes in the backyard, staking them the way he taught you, tying the vines with strips of old pantyhose because he swore it worked better than string. You called your friend Ottilie on Tuesdays, the two of you talking for an hour about nothing and everything, the kind of friendship that doesn't need a reason to keep going. You went to church on Sundays and sat in the third pew, same as always, and you told yourself that this small, steady life was enough. Most days it was. Then your son Palmer called. He said he was coming to visit. He said it with a softness in his voice you hadn't heard in years, and something in your chest loosened, because a mother never really stops hoping her children will come home to her, even when they've drifted so far, that home starts to feel like a place they used to know, rather than a place they still belong. You spent the whole morning before his visit cleaning a house that was already clean, fluffing pillows that didn't need fluffing, because some part of you still wanted him to walk in and feel like nothing had changed, like he was still welcome in every corner of it. Palmer arrived with his wife, Briar, and they sat at your kitchen table and drank the coffee you made. And they smiled at you in a way that, if you'd been paying closer attention, might have looked less like love and more like rehearsal. Briar complimented your china. She asked about the value of the antique clock in the hallway, the one Wendell's mother had left you, in a tone so casual you almost missed the weight behind the question. "Mom," Palmer said, setting down his cup, "we've been thinking. This house is a lot for you to manage alone. The stairs, the yard. What if something happened and nobody knew?" You told him you were fine. You told him you'd lived in that house since Nixon was president, and you knew every creak in the floorboards, every crack in the ceiling, and you weren't going anywhere. You told him you had Ottilie down the street, and the Hendersons next door who checked on you every evening without being asked, and the whole church congregation that would notice within a day if your porch light didn't come on. But Palmer had already made up his mind, and Briar had already found the place. Somerset Pines. She called it a premier senior living community 2 hours away. Close to nothing you knew, and no one who knew you. They didn't ask if you wanted to see it. They didn't ask if you wanted to go at all. They told you to pack a bag just for a weekend, just to look around, and because you have spent your entire life being agreeable, being the kind of woman who doesn't want to cause trouble, you packed your bag. You should have known something was wrong when Palmer carried out 3 more boxes from your closet without asking. Boxes he claimed were just for storage. You should have known when Briar took photographs of your living room on her phone, whispering numbers to herself under her breath, like she was pricing furniture at an estate sale. You should have known, but you didn't, because you didn't want to know. You wanted one more time to believe your son was simply taking care of you, the way you had spent your whole life taking care of him. The drive was long, and Palmer was quiet in a way you found unsettling. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful but heavy, like a man carrying something he doesn't want to set down in front of witnesses. Briar kept her eyes on her phone the entire time, scrolling through something you couldn't see, occasionally turning the screen away when you glanced over. You watched the trees blur past the window and thought about Wendell, about how he used to say that Palmer had his mother's trusting heart, and how sometimes a trusting heart is a wound that never fully closes. Somewhere around the second hour, Palmer pulled off the highway. "Need gas," he said, not quite meeting your eyes in the rearview mirror. "And you probably want to use the restroom." You did. Your body isn't what it used to be, and long car rides aren't kind to it anymore. You went inside the little gas station store, past the rack of postcards and the humming refrigerators of soda, taking your time the way you always do now. Careful on your feet, and when you came back out, blinking in the afternoon sun, the car was gone. Not moved. Not parked somewhere else. Gone. At first you thought you were confused. You walked around the side of the building, thinking maybe he'd pulled around back to check the tires or wait in the shade. You checked your phone, an old flip phone. Palmer had given you 2 Christmases ago, the kind with big buttons for your eyes. "Mom," and there was one text message from Briar. "This is for the best. Palmer couldn't do it in person. Somerset Pines has a waitlist spot for you if you can make your own way there. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." You read it twice, then 3 times. The letters didn't change, no matter how many times you read them, and that was the moment the ground seemed to tilt beneath you. The moment 74, years of being someone's mother, collapsed, quietly into the understanding that you had just been left, on purpose at a gas station, by your only child. You didn't cry right away. That's the strange thing about real heartbreak. It doesn't always announce itself with tears. Sometimes it just sits in your chest like a stone, heavy and silent, while the rest of the world keeps moving around you, oblivious, cars pulling in and out for gas, a family piling out to buy snacks, laughing about something you'll never know. You sat down on the plastic bench because your knees wouldn't hold you any longer, and you set your suitcase beside your feet, and you waited. Because waiting was the only thing your body knew how to do. The gas station attendant noticed you first. His name tag read Gideon, and he couldn't have been older than 22, with tired eyes and kind hands, the kind of young man who has clearly worked hard for everything. He has and doesn't take a moment of decency for granted. "Ma'am," he said, crouching slightly so he was at your eye level, the way you'd want a doctor to speak to a frightened child. "You doing okay out here? You've been sitting a while." You tried to answer him, but your voice cracked in your throat. And instead of forcing words out, you simply handed him your flip phone, the message still glowing on the screen. Gideon read it. You watched his face change. First confusion, then something sharper, something like anger on your behalf. The kind of anger that comes easily to people who still believe the world owes its elders better than this. "They just left you here?" he asked, and there was no mistaking the disbelief in his voice. You nodded, and that was when the tears finally came. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, the way grief comes to people who have spent a lifetime being told to be quiet about their pain, who learned somewhere along the way that their suffering should take up as little space as possible. Gideon didn't call the police, not at first. He didn't call some hotline for elder abandonment, though what had happened to you certainly qualified. Instead, he did something smaller and, in its own way, larger. He pulled a second folding chair from behind the counter, set it beside your bench, and sat with you. "My grandmother raised me," he said. "After my mom passed, I know what it's like when the people who are supposed to show up for you don't." He didn't ask you 100 questions. He didn't pity you with his eyes. He simply stayed, and for the first time in 3 hours, you didn't feel entirely alone in the world. He brought you a cup of coffee from the machine inside, weak and a little burnt, and you drank it anyway because his hands had made it for you. And that counted for something. He asked if there was anyone he could call, a friend, a relative, anyone, and you thought of Ottilie, your Tuesday friend, the one person left in this world who still called just to hear your voice, who never once, in 30 years of friendship, had made you feel like an inconvenience. Ottilie answered on the second ring, and when she heard what had happened, her voice went sharp with fury you hadn't heard from her in years. "I'm coming," she said. "Don't you move, Idella. Don't you dare think for 1 second you deserve this. I'm coming right now, and God help Palmer if he's anywhere near me when I get there." It took Ottilie 90 minutes to arrive, and in that time you sat with Gideon, Who told you about his grandmother? About how she used to make him practice his multiplication, tables at the kitchen table every night even, after working a double shift. About how she died 2 years ago and how not a single day passes that he doesn't miss her voice calling his name from the front porch when dinner was ready. You realized, listening to him, that kindness doesn't always come from the people who owe it to you. Sometimes it comes from strangers who simply refuse to let another person suffer alone in front of them, who understand instinctively that dignity is not something you should have to earn. When Ottilie arrived, tires crunching too fast into the gravel lot, she was out of the car before it had even fully stopped, and she wrapped her arms around you the way family is supposed to, the way blood is supposed to, and for a moment you allowed yourself to fall apart completely, because you finally had someone safe enough to fall apart in front of. "We're not going home yet," Ottilie said, once you'd both settled into her car, her jaw still tight with anger. "We're going to see Talmadge first." Talmadge Reeves had been your family's lawyer for 30 years, ever since Wendell first opened his hardware store downtown, the one that grew, slowly and steadily, into 3 locations across the county before. Wendell sold the business 6 years before he passed. Talmadge had handled the sale. Talmadge had handled Wendell's estate, and Talmadge, it turned out, had been trying to reach you for 2 days. "Idella," Talmadge said, when you finally sat across from his desk, still smelling faintly of gas station coffee and betrayal. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Has Palmer asked you to sign anything recently? Power of attorney, guardianship paperwork, anything like that?" You told him about the folder Breyer had left on your kitchen table 2 weeks ago. The one you hadn't opened because you trusted your son enough not to look too closely at what he handed you. You remembered how Breyer had said, almost offhand, just some routine paperwork, nothing to worry your head over, and how you had believed her. Because believing the people you love is so much easier than suspecting them. Talmadge's face tightened. "Idella, that folder, if it's what I think it is, would have given Palmer full legal control over your finances, including the trust Wendell set up, including the house." Something cold moved through you, a realization arriving slower than it should have, the way truth often does when it concerns the people we love most. Palmer hadn't brought you on a trip to look at a retirement community out of concern for your safety. Palmer had been maneuvering for weeks, maybe months, to gain control over everything Wendell had built, and abandoning you 2 hours from home, at a gas station with no way back, may well have been the final piece of a plan, meant to make you disappear quietly enough that no one would ask questions, tucked away in a facility where a signature could be gotten from you in a moment of exhaustion and fear. "He knew I wouldn't sign it," you said softly, understanding arriving in pieces. "So he needed me somewhere I couldn't say no, somewhere I'd have no choice but to go along." Talmadge nodded gravely. "There's something else you should know. Wendell came to see me 8 months before he passed. He said he had a feeling, nothing concrete, just a father's instinct, that Palmer's marriage to Breyer had changed him. He asked me to add a clause to the trust, a protection clause. It states that if any attempt is made to relocate you against your wishes, or to gain unauthorized control over the estate, the entire trust, including the house, the remaining business shares, and the investment accounts, transfers, immediately and irrevocably, into your sole name, with no path for Palmer to contest it. Idella, what happened today at that gas station didn't just fail to take anything from you. It triggered the clause. Everything Wendell built is entirely, legally, permanently yours. You sat in that office and wept, not from grief this time, but from something more complicated, the strange, aching relief of realizing that even after death, Wendell had been standing guard over you, quietly, faithfully, in a way Palmer never had. You thought of him at that kitchen table, folding his newspaper, saying nothing about his fears to you directly, choosing instead to build a wall around you that you would never even see, unless you needed it. That was Wendell's love, quiet, thorough, unseen until the moment it mattered most. 3 days passed before Palmer called. When he did, his voice had the false brightness of someone who assumed you'd simply gone, along with the plan, that you were, by now, settled into a room at Somerset Pines, quiet and compliant and no longer a complication in his life. "Mom, how's the new place treating you?" "I never went, Palmer," you said. And you let the silence stretch just long enough for him to understand that you knew everything. "I spoke to Talmadge," you continued. "I know about the guardianship papers. I know what leaving me at that gas station was supposed to accomplish, and I know about your father's trust clause. The silence on his end told you everything the folder never could have. Mom, I can explain. You don't need to explain, you said. And your voice was steadier than you expected it to be. Steadier than it had been in years, perhaps. Your father saw this coming before either of us did. He protected me from a version of you he hoped would never exist. I'm sorry that version is the one who showed up. You didn't scream. You didn't threaten him. You simply told him plainly that the house was yours now, fully and legally, and that the business shares he'd been counting on to fund whatever new life he and Briar had been planning were no longer his to touch. You told him you knew about the debts. Briar had likely convinced him to hide from you. The ones Talmadge had gently mentioned surfaced when the guardianship paperwork was drawn up. Debts that made the timing of this entire plan make painful, obvious sense, and then gently. Because some part of you would always be his mother, no matter what he'd done. You told him that the door was not permanently closed, that if he ever wanted to become the kind of son his father had hoped he'd remain, you would be willing one day to listen, but not yet. Not until he understood, truly understood what he had done. The weeks that followed felt like relearning how to breathe. Gideon still checks in on you. He calls every couple of weeks just to talk, just to make sure you're doing all right. And last month you invited him and his younger sister over for Sunday dinner. The first time your dining room table had been full in longer than you could remember. You've started teaching his sister the same recipes. Wendell used to love his mother's pot roast, the biscuits that take 4 tries to get right. And there is a version of family being built in your kitchen. Now that has nothing to do with blood and everything, to do with who actually shows up. Ottilie still comes on Tuesdays, though now she stays longer. And sometimes you two sit on the back porch and watch the tomatoes grow, and you think about how strange it is that the very people who are supposed to protect you can become the ones who hurt you the deepest, and how the people who owe you nothing can end up giving you everything. She has taken to calling Gideon our boy now, folding him into the small, fierce circle of people who actually showed up when it mattered, and you've stopped correcting her because it feels true. You've since had the locks changed, not out of spite, but out of self-respect, a decision Talmadge helped you make with quiet, careful patience, reminding you that protecting yourself doesn't require you to hate anyone, only to finally believe you deserve safety. You donated the boxes Palmer packed without asking, kept the few things that mattered, Wendell's reading glasses, a photograph of Palmer as a boy missing his front teeth, grinning like nothing bad could ever touch him, and let the rest go. The way you've slowly let go of the guilt that used to make you excuse behavior you should never have had to excuse. Some evenings, you still sit on that same kitchen counter Wendell used to lean against, and you talk to him quietly, the way you have since he passed, telling him about your days, about Gideon's laugh, about the tomatoes coming in heavier than last year. You tell him thank you, though you know he can't hear you, though you know some things are said simply because the saying of them matters more than the hearing. You are 74 years old, and you spent one afternoon on a plastic bench outside a gas station, abandoned by the one person who was supposed to never let that happen. But you were not abandoned by everyone. You were not abandoned by a husband who saw the truth before you could. You were not abandoned by a stranger who chose kindness over convenience. And you were certainly not abandoned by yourself, because even after everything, you found the strength to stand back up, to walk back into your own home, and to close the door behind you, not in anger, but in peace. They left me at a gas station to disappear quietly. Instead, I found out exactly who was standing beside me all along.